some things never change. 20 years later, I still put frogs on my nose. So this is me in Costa Rica with a red-eyed tree frog on my nose, and both these pictures have been in my dad's office for forever now. So these are my local celebrity photos. And so today I'm super excited to get to talk to you about poison frogs. And unlike frogs here in Canada, which are all still super cool, in the neotropics you get them in these bright, amazing colors, anywhere from blue, gold, red, white, different spots. They're all about the size of about 1/4 to 2 inches max. And today I'm going to talk to you about the strawberry poison frog in particular. So the distribution of these true poison frogs occurs generally in Central America. So up at the top, the first dot would be the southern range of Nicaragua, all the way down to the northern half of South America. And my frog in particular occurs right up at the top there in Panama, Costa Rica, and Nicaragua. And so all these frogs come in many different colors, but would you believe me if I told you that these two frogs are the same species? So this frog here I grabbed in Panama, where it's this really cool location where you can find all these frogs in different kind of color morphs. And the red and blue is typical in Costa Rica. And so these strawberry poison frogs, even in Costa Rica, kind of vary in color depending on where you are. My study site is La Selva, but you can find them either with a lot of black spots on their back. Sometimes they have no spots on their back. Other locations, they don't even have blue legs. So their color varies in the different regions depending on predators and sexual selection by the females. So this area in Panama, Bocas del Toro, is where I found the cool white one with the black spots. And this area is really cool because there's at least 15 different color morphs there, all of the same species. So how Darwin has his finches in the Galapagos Islands, in Bocas del Toro, Panama, the strawberry poison frog comes in these great colors from blue to green, back to the traditional color of just the blue with the reds, but they also come in these green with black spots, white with black spots. And this is a really hot topic now. And many different labs are trying to figure out why in this one location there would be so many colors of these frogs. And there's two main reasons that people have kind of agreed upon. Is one, girls like pretty things, so they'll like pretty males. So the brighter the color of a male, the more bright it is to predators. And potentially when these islands separated from the mainland, different colors were selected for because there's different predators on the different islands. So no one really knows for sure, but those are the two main conclusions so far. So stay tuned to that. But if you ever get a chance to go to Costa Rica, I would definitely hop the border and go to Bocas because there's beautiful beaches and many different colors of this beautiful frog. And so a common question I get, especially in North America, are all poison frogs dart frogs? So we're used to any color frogs in the tropics to be dart frogs. So here in Colombia, this is a native who uses the poison from these dart frogs to kill predators. And so no, not all frogs are dart frogs. So this is me again with my common photo of a frog on my nose. But it's not nearly as toxic as, say, the true dart frogs, which are generally these three are the most toxic. So they come from this group, the Phyllobates, but this is the golden poison dart frog, which is the most poisonous frog in the world. And it can kill 10 to 20 people. And so the natives don't even have to do anything with the frog. They can take their dart and rub it directly on the back of this frog, and that's enough poison to kill jaguars, birds, or monkeys, or whatever they need to eat. These other two frogs, the black-legged dart frog and the other smaller frog, are the second most toxic frogs. And in order to prepare their darts, the natives would put these close to a fire so they start sweating their toxins, and then they would prepare their darts. But this frog here could kill a human in 3 minutes. It's a neurotoxin, so it seeps through the skin or the wound, and it'll get into your nervous system, and it'll cause your heart to contract, and there's nothing you can do about it. So I would definitely not go around in the jungle grabbing any frog and putting it on your nose. So if I see one of these, I am not touching it or getting anywhere near it. So why is there a difference in the toxicity? And it really depends on the origin of the alkaloid chemical defenses. So these toxins are actually sequestered in the skin glands from a diet of mites and ants primarily. So in Costa Rica, where we have our strawberry frog, the mites that they're eating are not nearly as toxic as these golden dart frogs in Colombia. And so it depends on what these mites are eating. So the toxic plants that they would be eating are more toxic in Colombia than they would be in Costa Rica. So it's really cool that their toxins really depend on what they're eating. So if you were to go to Vancouver Aquarium or Science World where they have some dart frogs on display, they're probably actually not true dart frogs or toxic at all, because the meals that they would be feeding them wouldn't be having any poisonous plant contact. So actually you'll be able to go see these frogs. They still have their brilliant colors, but they won't be toxic like as if you found them in the jungle in their natural habitats. And so the behavior of the strawberry poison frog is what I'm going to be talking to you today. So they're a diurnal frog, so they're active during the day. They're aposematic, so because they're toxic, they like to broadcast this with their pretty colors, and therefore they can be active during the day. They're highly territorial, so they like to pick a certain spot in the jungle and they live there. Males will mate with many females at the same time. The males will call from perches, and they live in the leaf litter. They have a complex courtship that I'll tell you about in a couple minutes, and there's extensive parental care in these frogs. And just these, the colors on the legs are actually from braces. My friend that studies them found out that the rubber band on braces fits perfectly into the elbow of these frogs so that she could follow males and females around and see what they're doing for her PhD. And so what is parental care? Can anyone give me a definition of parental care? So parental care is any behavior that betters the chances of the offspring's survival. So this time of year especially, you'll see a lot of birds getting happy with each other, and they'll pick their favorite tree and they'll start building nests. So building nests, site choice, brooding, so sitting and guarding the nest and keeping the eggs warm until they hatch. Cleaning, provisioning is just a fancy word for feeding. So birds will bring back bugs, mammals can produce milk, and predator defenses. And so there's a diversity in parental care in all organisms. In mammals, it's 90% female-only care. In birds, it's 90% by parental care, so both males and females will look after the young. And in fishes, 50% males will care for the young. And this really depends on the environment, on behavior, whether the organism is social or not. Because there's a lot of costs involved if you're a parent to look after your young. You have to separate your time into producing a lot of energy for your young. And in amphibians, we generally don't think of them as parents, but 10 to 20% of the species actually show some form of parental care. So salamanders will guard their eggs. Some frogs actually will guard their babies by holding them in their mouths, and this will keep them away from predators. The Sicilian is a legless amphibian. This is kind of gross, but the parents will let the babies feed off its skin for its nutrients. And in poison frogs, they will transport and feed their young, which I'll get into in just a moment. And so what do you see in these two pictures? Another interactive question. I'll get y'all to talk at some point. So what's in this first picture here? Exactly, so this is a plant, and what's in the other picture? Yeah, so this is a plant, and over here we have a pond, but to me, this plant is more than just a plant. It's a bromeliad, and they're very common in the neotropics. In the jungle, there's generally a distinct dry season and wet season, so there's not a lot of these ponds that we're used to seeing in North America. So this plant actually is really cool in that these leaves axils, when they form together, they create many little ponds. So to you, this might be a plant in a pond. To me, this is still a pond in a pond. So this is where I'll actually find my tadpoles in these plants. And often even sometimes smaller bromeliads will have these tadpoles as well. And so this is a bromeliad in the jungle on the floor, but normally it's an epiphyte, so it's on top of a tree. It doesn't have roots like most plants that we have here in the North America. So it relies on water and fallen leaves to get the nutrients from the ecosystem. And also there's the terrestrial, so the frogs who live on the outsides and the bugs live on the outsides, but they'll all put their eggs within, so you'll actually get a small pond with many mosquito larvae and microorganisms and tadpoles in there. So this is a really cool aspect of the jungles in Costa Rica. And so the fathers in the jungle will sing a delightful song to the female. The female will check out the male in his territory. And if there's enough of these good breeding sites, or if there's enough leaf litter, the female will lay eggs in the leaf litter for the male. And it's up to the male to guard and hydrate these eggs until they turn into tadpoles. And then the female will come back and put each tadpole, there will be 1 to 5, and she'll put each of them on her back and give them a piggyback ride to her favorite bromeliad. And so that could be anywhere from on the ground or 100 meters into the canopy, into the forest. And each tadpole will get a different axle. She'll never put them in the same axle, and often she has many different bromeliads where she'll put her young. And the cool thing about these tadpoles is they have to eat the eggs the mom provides. So for 6 weeks, moms will return 1 to 7 days, and they'll lay unfertilized eggs into the bromeliad axle with the tadpole. And that's all the tadpole is believed to eat for the duration of their life as a tadpole before they turn into froglets. And this is just a video of from Jennifer Steinowski's work. She put little cups up on these trees to act like bromeliad leaf axles. And this is just going to show you what it looks like when the female returns to feed her young. And you'll be able to hear a male frog calling in the background. So that's a male. And this is a female coming back. So her tadpole's swimming around, getting really excited. And so it exhibits this vibrating behavior. And then towards the bottom of the screen, you can see unfertilized eggs the mom's laying for this tadpole. And so here we have the moms leaving the cup. The tadpole is now left with these 4 unfertilized eggs until the mom returns. So this is pretty cool. And so in this talk today, I hope to answer 3 main questions. And one is, how did the mother frogs recognize and communicate with these offspring? And then 2 questions with regards to the tadpoles is, how do the tadpoles tell the difference between mothers and predators? And how do these tadpoles interact with the invertebrate and microorganisms within this bromeliad pool of water? And so this study occurs at the Selva Biological Station in Costa Rica. If you're ever in Costa Rica, I'd highly recommend spending a night there. There's sloths and frogs, and it's a pretty awesome jungle out there. And so this is just a map of what La Selva looks like, and the square is where our study sites are. And it's in an old abandoned cacao plantation, which is now a secondary forest. So it's very nice that all the trees are in rows so that you can put hundreds of thousands of cups in the jungle and you'll be able to locate them. So this is La Selva. This is what the abandoned cacao plantation looks like. And these are the cups up against trees. And Jennifer has tricked the tadpole, or well, the frogs into believing that these cups are great sites to put your tadpoles, which is awesome for doing studies like this. So this is what the Huertos plots look like. And these are all bromeliads, so this is a great place. It's pretty much a tadpole farm. You can't go 2 steps without being able to grab 5 or 6 poison frogs at the same time, so it's an awesome place to be. So these cups act exactly like these 2 bromeliad leaf axils, and this way we can also manipulate where the tadpole is for different studies. And so what my friend Jennifer did was she wanted to ask the question, how do mother frogs recognize their offspring? So there's 2 ways to recognize your offspring. There's direct, so at birth there's some kind of chemical smell or sound that your baby will recognize, or will make, and you will recognize for the duration. And then there's indirect, like these wasps. They have this comb, and they will remember spatially that that is where they put their larvae, and that area of the comb is always where their larvae will be. And so because there's these 2 ways to recognize offspring, using these 2 cups on the sides of trees provided a really great way to manipulate this. So we're pretending that always the moms were putting it in cup B. And so what Jenny did was to tell whether the frogs could identify their tadpole. She switched the mom's tadpole with a random other tadpole from a different bromeliad or cup. To determine if location was important, she just simply moved the tadpole from the right to the left. And if the mom could identify the tadpole, she would be able to see it in the next cup and then feed it there. And finally, in the 3rd cup, she just left the tadpole in that cup and measured how much it growed in the duration of the study. So the great thing about maternal care is if the tadpoles aren't getting fed, they're not growing. So what Jenny did was every day she took a picture of each of the tadpoles to measure their growth and just compared the size of the tadpole to the ruler, and you could measure how much the tadpoles were growing. So what she found was that recognition was based on tadpole location. So here we have tadpole length on the y-axis and the day since the mom put the tadpole in the cup. And so identity is the squares where Jenny switched the tadpole with another tadpole, and the control is where she left the tadpole where the mom put it. And those 2 are the tadpoles groups that were growing. But you can see when Jenny moved the tadpole to the 2nd cup, the tadpoles stopped growing. So what you can tell here is that the moms are really good at remembering which tree they climbed up, what bromeliad they decided, and which leaf axil they put their baby. But if you move this bromeliad like this, she won't be able to recognize that her tadpole is now on the other side. So she remembers these locational cues. And so from that, me and Jenny wanted to know which senses are directing the behavior in the strawberry poison frog tadpoles. So how do the tadpoles recognize their mother, and how do they recognize predators such as this Taenid spider? And so predation can occur throughout your life, and in the game of life, you want to live because dying means game over. And so you want to be able to avoid predators, but it occurs at the egg stage, the larvae stage, and the adult stage. So there's different ways that organisms can avoid predators. So there's passive ways, like the adult frogs are toxic. So they show this by being bright red and blue legs. But different ways to avoid predators are active ways, but you need to be able to use your senses to be able to understand the world around you. Like we can touch, see, taste, hear, and smell. And organisms can do the same to assess the world around them. So they can, like the zebra, saw the line and ran. Other animals display, look really big, or just freeze. So these sensory modes that these organisms use are either tactile, chemical, visual, or auditory. So here, this is a pretty cool study done with red-eyed tree frog eggs, where this egg clutch is being attacked by a snake. And these tadpoles, even though they're not fully developed, can hatch prematurely because it's better to be a small tadpole in a big pond than a dead tadpole in a snake's belly. So they'll hatch early because of this tactile cue. In fish, this minnow has some of its cells will exhibit an alarm cue if they get broken. So if this fish got eaten by another bigger fish, it'll warn the other minnows within the water that there's a predator, even if this minnow can't see it. For mating, this is an example of mating. This is visual and tactile cues. These wolf spiders will drum on the ground to impress the female and wave their arms around, and then hopefully she'll pick him as her lucky man. And baby birds are really good with auditory cues, so they'll be able to tell their moms and their fathers. So if they can hear their mom, they'll get really excited and beg for food. But if they hear another bird approach their nest that isn't, they'll get really quiet and hide. So these are just some of the sensory modes used in organisms to assess the world around them. In tadpoles, it's generally these chemosensory cues or chemical in the water, but this is basically based on pond-dwelling tadpoles. They live in big open spaces. They're generally only active during the night so that they can avoid being seen by predators. So they need these chemical cues to sense the world around them. But we now know that these strawberry poison frogs are much different. They're active during the day. They don't live in ponds. They live in bromeliads. And these mothers and offspring need to communicate. So we hypothesize that the sensory mode for discriminating between predators and their mothers for food differs from that than in the nocturnal pond-dwelling tadpoles. So our first question was, how do mothers communicate with tadpoles? And we were able to do this with cups, so we went out into the field and collected tadpoles from either Jenny's cups or bromeliads, and we took them back to the lab and we did a nice easy cup experiment where we measured the different sensory cues. So we have controls where we put the tadpole in a cup for 10 minutes and measured its, with a video, we just measured how much of the time it spent resting or swimming. We had chemical cues where we had already soaked a mom in some water for a large amount of time so that it would have this chemical cue, and then we dropped 20 drops in with the tadpole and measured its behavioral response. Then we had the tadpole in a cup and a mom in another cup outside the cup for the visual cue, and then we combined the chemical and visual cues together, and finally we had a third cup, well, not a third cup, fifth cup, where the mom was in with the baby, and so that would give it the tactile, visual, and chemical cues, and then we did this at night. Well, we did it in the dark so that it would be the tactile and chemical cues alone, so we could pull apart which of these cues were the main cues that these moms and tadpoles use to communicate. And so on the y-axis is the percent of the 10-minute trial that the baby was either vibrating, which is the behavior for feeding, or swimming. And you can see it really wasn't until it had the visual cue that the tadpole would really start swimming and get excited that it could see its mom. And it wasn't until the mom was directly in the cup and the baby could see it that it would exhibit this behavior of vibrating in order to tell the mom that it was hungry. The same cup, but in the dark, didn't show the same behavior. It was no different than the control. So we really think it's this visual with this tactile cue that's really important for this feeding behavior, and possibly chemical, because we couldn't directly separate that out. And this is just a video of what that would look like, me trying to watch the video. So here's the tadpole in with the mom. Tadpole is super excited and vibrating like crazy. This is real time. And so it's vibrating, and mom eventually is going to be like, okay, and it's going to start laying eggs at the bottom of your screen. So this really is the secret sensory combination that gets this feeding behavior. And so now that we know that the tadpole has to be able to see the mom to vibrate. We wanted to know how the tadpoles can detect potential predators and if they adjust their behavior accordingly. And this is because 60% of these tadpoles will die or disappear before metamorphosing in these bromeliads, which seems pretty high, but if you look at red-eyed tree frogs in the pond just next door, 1% of the egg mass will actually survive to being a frog. So this is a tenid frog here, eating a tadpole, unfortunately. And this is how they would sit at the top of the leaf axil with their legs pointing down into the water, feeling the vibrations. And so in this experiment, we had another video experiment where we had a cup with the scary predator sitting at the top, and then we had a cup where the tadpole could just act like normal. And so here we have the percent of time that the tadpole is active, and this is just moving, it never vibrated. So for the first 10 minutes, you can see that the tadpole freezes. It doesn't move, it just sits at the bottom of the cup, hoping that the spider is going to leave. Eventually, it does look like the tadpole starts to regain some sort of activity, but that's because these tadpoles breathe air, so they have to come to the surface of the cup. So this might be when they're most vulnerable to the predators sitting at the top of the leaf axil. But they still don't resume their normal amounts of activity after 20 minutes. And so we figured out that these strawberry poison frog tadpoles use visual and tactile and potentially chemical cues to discriminate predators and egg-providing mothers. And these tadpoles will freeze in the presence of spiders, so they can tell the difference between a predator and their mothers. And so finally, this is the work that I'm completing now and will get to present at a conference in Costa Rica next month. And it's work I've been doing with these people at the bottom. And this is the effect of strawberry poison frogs on the poison frog tadpoles on the communities within the bromeliads. So are the tadpoles beneficial for the mosquitoes and the microorganisms within? So we luckily can do this in a cup. Here's a tadpole, and this actually is a mosquito larva right here. And this is what a community would look like in an actual bromeliad in the field. We have the black dot, which is a tadpole, and all these floating things are mosquitoes. And then we have a scary spider that's hoping to get a nice meal. And then we have detritus, which is just fallen leaf litter, which provides nutrients to the plant and to some of the detritivores within this bromeliad. So we really want to understand this food web within these bromeliads. So again, there's the terrestrial part of the ecosystem where the adult flies will deposit their eggs, and then the larvae stage of these bugs will live in the aquatic environment. And this is the same now with these tadpoles in this area. So our theory is that since these tadpoles are only eating eggs, that they're going to produce feces in these water pools, which will give more growth to bacteria. And these bacteria will feed these protozoans. And if there's more protozoans, the survival of mosquito larvae should be better with these tadpoles, is kind of our hypotheses here. And so I used this little mosquito. I was able to find 150 of these all at a roughly amount of 2 millimeters. And they had this really long siphon, which was just really easy for me to identify when peering into a bromeliad. And I would use something that looks like this, which is zipper to just stick in between the axils of the bromeliads and suck up whatever mosquitoes. And these also work for tadpoles if you cut off the edges. So tadpoles really aren't that big. And so I took water samples from these cups back to the lab here at UBC, and I counted the amounts of ciliates, which are these circular fuzzy things, the flagellates, which are just here, and these are cute little rotifers. So I spent hours counting these in the lab here. And so we had two hypotheses here, was that tadpoles should increase the protozoan abundance, probably through this fecal nutrients, since they're only eating eggs. And as a result, these tadpoles should increase the survival of mosquito larvae. And so I went out into the field, I hugged some bromeliads, and I also collected some mosquitoes and tadpoles. And since I'm now tadpole mom, I had to go into the researcher swamp, which is the only swamp at La Selva where you're allowed to do this. But I would actually collect 1 or 2 clutches of red-eyed tree frog eggs, and I would separate the yolk from the egg whites, and I would put these in the fridge, and I would end up feeding these to the tadpoles because it's impossible to find strawberry poison frog eggs in high enough quantities out in the field without killing the tadpoles themselves because you're starving them in the field. So I took all these great things back to the lab and I set up a cup experiment. It really just looked like I had a giant picnic all the time because it turns out ice cube trays are really great for putting tadpoles in when you want to feed them. So it was just a bunch of cups and ice cube trays out on this table. And then once a week I would measure the length of the tadpoles, and every other day I would feed the tadpoles and check mosquito larvae for survival. And so it was another cups, so I had control cups with just leaves to give food to the microorganisms. Then I separated my tadpoles into large and small just because they look really different, but also small tadpoles probably only produce small poop and large tadpoles probably bigger poop. And then I had mosquitoes, small tadpoles with mosquitoes and large tadpoles with mosquitoes, kind of to pull apart the effects of mosquito larvae and tadpoles on these food webs. And so this is just an example of what a small tadpole looks like. It doesn't quite have its legs yet, and large tadpoles have their cute little legs. And this is what it looks like when I'm mother frog. And this is kind of what the jungle sounds like at 5 o'clock. So I'd use a frog just to get it to do its behavior that it's going to be fed. And then I'd give it an egg, and I would leave it in these ice cube trays for 2 hours so that it could eat this egg, and then I would put it back in the experiment. Ready to be left alone with his egg and moving on to the next tadpole. But now you'll be able to see all the tadpoles kind of munching on their little egg over here. So these would have been the small tadpoles, which look a lot different. But they all thought that the red-eyed tree frog egg was appropriate. So I can successfully say I raised 40 little strawberry frogs and was able to release them back into the jungle. So they really weren't any bigger than my thumbnail when they turned into juvenile frogs. So quickly, just to finish off, how did tadpoles' presence affect the mosquito survival? And so this is a survivalship graph. 1 is just 100%. And so the small jagged line at the top is mosquitoes with small tadpoles live significantly better than with large tadpoles. And this was because large tadpoles occasionally ate my mosquito larvae, and I was not expecting this, but it does kind of make sense at a rain stage 36, which means nothing to you, but it seems to be when they start developing their teeth maybe, and so something wiggly right beside them when they're hungry might look like a quick snack. But actually the take-home message is that it's better for, in this other graph, when you group both tadpole sizes together, that it's more beneficial for mosquito larvae to be with a tadpole in terms of their survival than it is to be without a tadpole, so that's pretty cool. And finally, just looking quickly at the presence of tadpoles and or mosquitoes on the protozoan community. And this is just the abundance of protozoans altogether. And so without tadpoles, mosquito larvae greatly reduce the protozoan abundance. And so the take-home message from this experiment just is that results suggest that mosquitoes alone in the absence of tadpoles reduce the abundance of protozoans. Mosquitoes benefit from being with tadpoles, and however, mosquitoes have a greater risk of being eaten as tadpoles get larger. And that tadpoles did occasionally eat mosquito larvae, which was something we did not expect to happen at all, so that's kind of something new we've kind of discovered about the behavior of these tadpoles. And so thanks. So now we know these answers to 3 of these cool questions. There's many other questions out there, but I hope you've enjoyed this talk and stay tuned. There's always new and exciting things going on with poison frogs. And so with that, I would like to thank my collaborators. This is Cora, Jennifer, my advisor Diane, and all our funding sources and other people that have helped along the way. And with that, I would like to thank you all for coming, and I will take any of your way cool answers. Thanks.